Yurakoto, welcome to our webinar. Nice and punctual. Good to see the numbers coming in. Just give people a few minutes to log on. Just give people another 10 seconds or so. Yurakoto, welcome to our webinar, Breaking the Waste Cycle, Taking Responsibility for Your Products in the Construction Sector. My name is James Griffin, and I'm the General Manager at the Sustainable Business Network. What we'll do is we'll start off this webinar with an opening karakia. Tuta mai I runga, tuta mai I raro, tuta mai I waho, tuta mai I roto, kia tu ai te mori ora, ki te katoa, humie, huie, tai kie. So what we will be running through in the next 45 minutes or so is I'll provide a bit of an introduction to the webinar, a bit of a context, and then we'll be hearing from Paula at saveBOARD, Karen at Resene, and then Joanne at Environmental Impact Centre about product stewardship in action. We'll then preview the product stewardship resource, and there's also a couple of other resources as a bonus that we'll be sharing with you as well. Bit of housekeeping. We have the chat function. I think the chat function is working, so if it is, feel free to put messages and say hello to people in there. The Q&A section function is working, so as we go through the presentation, if you have questions, please put them in there. We'll endeavour to either answer them on air if we have time, or answer them in writing as we go through, or any questions that we haven't got time to address, we will address post and then send out to you along with the slides and all the links to the resources that you're going to see post the webinar. So that's the plan. So what I just want to do is just make sure we all know what we're talking about when we say product stewardship. So this is when producers, brand owners, importers, retailers, and customers take responsibility for reducing a product's environmental impact throughout its whole life cycle. So the key thing is that we all have a role to play in managing that environmental impact. Typically, that would see itself as take-back schemes where offcuts, etc., and products at the end of their life are returned to manufacturer so they can reuse them in additional products. So that's effectively what we're talking about. Now, why are we talking about product stewardship? Well, I'm sure lots of you will know there's some fairly obvious elements around this. 50% up to 50% of all waste to Class 1 landfill is made up from construction waste. A study found that there's 5.7 tons of waste generated per average standalone house. And that is effectively equating to $31,000 worth of wasted materials. And so I think those numbers really do speak for themselves as why we need to steward these materials through their life cycle so they don't end up in landfill and and that value is retained and maximized. Now, this is, I love this sort of reflection from Renee Jacobson at Jacobson's, where she's saying product stewardship offers us a solution to the landfill crisis, because it gets us questioning what happens to this product at the end of life. And I think that's something that we all really are increasingly asking. So product stewardship schemes help us to address that. Now, bit of more context as to how we've gotten to this webinar now. We've been working with the construction sector accord for over a year now. Started in April 2023. We hosted an all of sector workshop where we were looking at what are the key priorities that the sector should focus on to effectively transition to a more circular economy. And there were a number of things that came out of that, and the three sort of industry selected initiatives were increased product stewardship within the sector. And very much related to that is increasing reverse logistics, which is getting materials back to where they need to go to, and as well as integrated design. And in fact, we'll be talking about integrated design at a webinar tomorrow. We have formed action groups following that, and those are the wonderful people that have contributed to these action groups, as well as wider stakeholders. And so that's enabled us to develop a very practical resource to help you develop product stewardships and maximize product stewardship schemes you may already have in process. So, but what we're going to do now is really just focus on product stewardship and action. Let's see what's happening out there in the real world. So, first of all, it's a pleasure to introduce Paula from saveBOARD. So, welcome, Paula, and
hello,
I'll stop sharing and over to you. Thank you.
So, I'll just bring up my screen. Push share. Okay. Please hold. I'm just trying to go from beginning, but the tab is in the way. Sorry. Right, so have I got slideshow? Can you see? And have I got it from beginning?
Yes, it looks
perfect.
Alrighty. Well navigated, Paula.
Thank you. First and foremost, thanks for having me here today, and thanks for attending. So the focus, of course, is today on product stewardship. And so I've chosen two products, which are multi-use, which you see here, and also our rigid air barrier, our Better Brace. These will give you relatable examples of what we're doing for the product stewardship of these two programs. I will just really quickly touch on how it's made in the first place and the circularity that is involved with these products, because that then makes much more sense when we get to what happens when we recycle it at end of life with our product stewardship program. So as mentioned, this particular product here is multi-use, which is used for hoardings and for internal wall lining. And then, of course, everyone knows what a rigid air barrier is, and that's the one that is called Better Brace. So those are the two products that we are looking at. That particular house there was cut to length, and the product stewardship that they sent back to us was only about 10 kilos of product, just as a little side note. So what do we put in it in the first place? So soft plastic, including construction waste. And also the bottom left there, when you go to the supermarket, a lot of that soft plastic makes its way back to us as well. We use primarily food and beverage cartons, so composite waste, and then offcuts, end-of-life product is returned to us as well. So that's what goes in it. And then what happens to it? You can see on the left there, it all gets measured like a cake, and then it gets shredded. So we measure all of the different ways that I've just showed you. It all gets mixed up and then shredded, and then goes through heat and compression for probably about 5 to 7 minutes a board, depending on what we're making. And that bed starts off its life at 100 millimeters and becomes a 10 millimeter board, for example. So there's nothing else in it. There's no glues, there's no resins, there's no additives, there's no water. Okay, so it's just the waste. So that's how we make it. So this is the Elevate homes. I'm going to give you an example of what they do. So Elevate homes, we cut to length in order to reduce the amount of waste that they're then having to deal with at the end of each project. That waste comes back to us in small pieces. So in order for it to go through the shredder, when businesses are returning to us, we don't take the full sheet. The only sort of work that needs to be done is to be able to cut it into, that's quite small, but 1200 by 300 meter pieces if it's a full sheet. And then that they organise their own transportation to us. We also assist in that. We've got lots of programs in place depending on the region within the country of how it gets back to us. So the cost of the freight from site to us is at the expense of the project, but there's no cost for us to receipt it. So there's no gate fee. Next. So the multi-use is the hoarding product. So this is a big one that comes back to us. Multi-use can be outside for about 2 years, unpainted, and then up to 3 years if it's painted. We can take it back if it's got a vinyl wrap or painting on it. The level of contamination is less than 1%. So that's like putting a pinch of salt in your chocolate cake. It's not going to make a difference to the chocolate cake. So you can see that larger image there, or the overlay image. That is when it's the deterioration over time. So that doesn't affect the process of us in our system at the end of it either. So they, again, they get chopped up. They might have a bit of cement. They might have paint on it, graphics of branding. That all just comes back into us. This is an example from a fabrication. So offcuts of product stewardship coming back to us from fabrication. So this was a business that was cutting with a water jet. They actually cut really well at 200 PSI, and they were making little boxes. So that's really simple for them to return to us because it's already in smaller pieces than the full sheets. And so that came back in and was remanufactured into more better joinery, which is our cabinet product. So that just goes straight back in. The other really good opportunity for product stewardship is pop-ups. So our product gets used a lot for temporary. So hoardings are temporary, art installations. This one's from the Dow's Art Gallery in Wellington, and you can see they've just used our exposed blackboard as plinths. And so businesses like this, they don't want to be putting product into landfill when they've only been using it for a month. So we get a lot of product stewardship opportunities that are generated from temporary installations, whether that's construction or an installation as it's shown here. Now, as an idea of the amount of waste that we are being able to take back, we're eliminating the future waste problem also by recycling recycled product. So even though lots of products might be made out of recycled materials, and we use about 30 kilos of waste is diverted from landfill for every board, it's a recycled product that is then recycled again. So we're creating that circularity, and we're also taking the customer waste, and that is getting made into their boards as well. But we are actually stopping or eliminating the waste stream by recycling our recycled product. So I know we've only got 10 minutes today, and that's me. And we have got an opportunity for questions. So I'll jump online now, whoever's up next, and answer any questions that we've got there. And then also too, if you would like to learn more in detail, all you have to do is contact me. I can arrange a webinar for your office, or I can come in to your office and have a visit with your team. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paula. Love what you're doing there. And yeah, so yeah, 30 kgs of waste for every board produced, and then being able to be re-looped back into the system as well. Great stuff. So there are some there's a few questions there in the chat, Paula. So as you said, you can feel free to add those answers as we go. But so now let's hear from Karen from Resene. Take it away, Karen.
Hi, James. Just trying to get this to work properly. A minute.
Yep.
Hopefully the screen has come up now.
Yep, the screen has come up. You want to, if you put it on full screen, yep, that would be perfect.
It's taking its little time to do that. Hello, everybody. We have, I'm Karen from Resene. I work in the marketing department, but I have also been involved with paint waste since we started around about 25 years ago, which makes me a dinosaur in some ways. And we've worked a long time on paint waste. It's evolved a long way from where we started. So I'll give you a bit of background about where we've been, how we got to where we are today, and also some of the challenges that we learned along the way that perhaps might help you on your own journey. So day zero was actually one customer rang us up and she couldn't recycle a paint can. And our probably pretty naive thought at the time was actually, oh, well, we can help her to actually get the councils to accept it. In those days, curbside recycling did actually accept paint cans. So we thought, oh, we'll just, fill up with the council, let them know they can accept it at curbside, and job done basically. But then when we sort of thought about it more, the reality is that most people who have paint in their garage don't actually just have paint in their garage in a can. They actually have paint inside it. They have plastic containers. They have whatever brand it might be. So we got from going, maybe actually help recycle empty paint cans, to actually, we have to deal with the plastic. We have to deal with our paint. We probably need to deal with other people's paint as well. Will customers actually use the service if they have to sort out what they can and can't return? Probably not. So that it sort of went from being very quickly a very simple service of empty paint cans, which were at the time highly recyclable, to taking care of the rest of the waste, none of which was recyclable at that point in time. So we started doing the work in 1999, which seems an incredibly long time ago, and we first trialled it in 2004. The reality is it took so long to get started because nobody was doing product stewardship in those days, and everything we did was starting from scratch. There was no examples to follow. Nobody was doing it. The councils didn't know what to do with a paint company who was doing this sort of stuff. We actively engaged councils in every area that we were in. And that was really important for us because we wanted to make sure that they were behind what we're doing and they would help promote it. And also that if something went wrong with the collection, because it is wet paint after all, that the council was actually actively involved and that they would actually help us sort the problem out if we had a problem. Luckily, we never did. In 2004, after we'd been working on it for 5 years, we then started working with 3R, who are experts at product stewardship. And ever since then, we've been working with them up until today, which is 20 years later. In the very, very early days, a kind of a standout moment was working with Auckland Council. And in those days, Auckland Council was actually 7 or 8 different councils, sitting at a table, discussing whether we bring paint wise into being. and getting every reason why we couldn't do it because somebody will do something with anything, to the point that I sort of said, oh, well, maybe we just don't do it, it's all too hard. And very quickly everyone went, oh, no, we need to do something. So the roadblocks got removed very quickly after probably about 2 years of actually trying to make progress in Auckland. So at that time, product stewardship was just so new that people didn't really know how to deal with it. When we started Paintwise, we decided it had to be more than just recycling, and more than just a rubbish service. So very much we were focused on buying better, buy what you need, don't buy anything more. Don't waste paint down the drain by washing out brushes when you don't need to. So we've started pushing messages about wrapping your brush in plastic or in plastic bags so you can actually leave it overnight, you don't need to wash it up. Watching how you clean up after you use paint. So again, there's actually like a 2-bucket method. You can actually clean up after painting and it doesn't waste as much paint. Looking at how you store your paint. So a lot of the reason that paint goes off is actually because you store it badly, either in a hot spot or you store it outside and the paint can goes rusty. So the better that people store their paint, the more chance they've got they can use it later. And then obviously the recycling and the reuse element as well. So there was a whole lot of things went into reducing the need for Paintwise. And then once you've gone through all those other options, Paintwise was there. It was almost the kind of the ambulance to save it. Once you hadn't managed to kind of buy it better, minimize your wash, you hadn't reused it, you hadn't stored it yourself properly, Paintwise was there to kind of help you at the end of it. And it's even 20 years later, it's still an ongoing journey. It's still not finished. The program is always evolving, and I suspect it always will be. We started initially with a trial in Wairau Park, and the reason it was chosen was purely because curbside recycling started in Wairau Park in Auckland. So the thought was that if everyone in New Zealand, they would be the most receptive to this kind of program. It gave us a chance to try the idea out without committing to what could be a permanent format. At the time in Auckland, there was a Hasmobile service, which used to run probably about twice a year in most areas, and they would do a single day event where you could return your paint, your batteries, your chemicals, and everything else. So we basically used that idea and said, once a month for 6 months, we will accept paint back at our Wairau Park Resene colour shop. As soon as we started that trial on the first day, within an hour, we decided that we would never, ever do it again that way. So apart from getting through the trial, we knew immediately that was not the right solution. And the reason why is because when you do a single event on a single day, you end up with a giant pile of returns that you just can't handle. It took months and months to sort it all out. 1 day a month was really inconvenient to people. People wanted to bring it back when it suited them, not the 1 day a month that we'd chosen. And invariably, the day after you do the collection, the next day people would be starting to ask, oh, when's the collection? I missed it. Do I have to wait another month for it? It also required a lot of work to actually get it visible that we're even having an event day. Because you're only doing it once a month, you have to kind of advertise everyone separately. You have to, basically create demand for it. And then as soon as it's finished, you've got to do all the education that it's not actually on for another month. And it also required a lot of extra staff on the day just to manage the returns, because our store still had to run normally. So we actually had a separate reception area for these paint containers coming back in. So very quickly, we decided that that was not the way to do it. And what we decided to do instead was to make Paintwise a part of our everyday business, which had basically the result of spreading the load and meant all the staff were involved in the process, not reliant on specific staff just to do it on 1 day of the week. Effectively, there's 7 easy steps to recycle paint. So in terms of construction waste, let's focus on that. We do actually also accept returns from retail, but this is mainly focused on trade. The key thing on site is actually setting the expectation that the paint and the paint containers will be recycled. And we do that. We include in specifications. We have a lot of companies we work with now that they actually set it as a rule that the paint must be recycled. A lot of the painters will automatically return their paint. We also set up our own network of sustainably minded painters who are called eco-decorators, and they also are very focused on making sure they minimise their waste, which includes using Paintwise for all their paint returns. On site, having a place where the paint can go. So, as soon as the paint is used, it has a place that it can live on site until it's ready to be returned. Then it gets returned to the Resene Paintwise service, which I'll cover a little bit more off soon. Resene staff check and sort the paint. So prior to that point, we don't need any paint sorted at all. The Paintwise truck collects the paint gets decanted from the containers, and then the packaging goes off to recycling and the paint is processed and then goes to various recycling and reuse options. We don't require people to do much on site. We try and make it real simple, minimise the effort that's required. In terms of returning things to the Resene service, we accept any brand of paint, any stains, any primers, empty pails, empty cans. That was a deliberate decision 20 years ago, because we thought there's no one's going to return half the containers in their shed and not the other half, or maybe there'll be 9 Resene and 1 something else. So the idea was make it easy and let people bring in everything that they have in their shed and truly clean out their shed for them. There is a small charge for non-Resene paints, so that's anything that's not Resene branded. We do have a maximum return of 20 packs per day, and that's purely just to avoid overloading a store. You can return them whenever the colour shop is open. So we have around about 60 locations in New Zealand that accept back paint returns. And whatever time they're open, you can bring it in any time of day that suits. And those stores are from Kerikeri in the north to Invercargill in the south. The only area we're slightly weak on is in the west coast, which we don't have any stores in that area, so that's the only reason why. And we have an acceptance list online, which started off pretty basic and over the years has expanded to include more products. We always encourage returning paint when it's fresh. It is much easier to use paint when it is actually fresh. Once it dries, you basically turned it into rubbish. So very, very much we're focused on, return it where you can, or donate it yourself to someone who can use it in your community, which might be a school or someone else like that. The other element we try and do is reduce the waste that you create with a product stewardship program. So it's very easy to create a program that takes care of the paint, but then in the meantime, you create a whole lot of other waste. So if people just made a trip to Resene just to return, one paint can, that wouldn't be great resource-wise. So our theory was, when you come to get your new paint, you can return your old paint at the same time. Therefore, no extra trips required, no extra petrol, and basically you're going there anyway. For those that can't return the paint themselves, so they've got a massive pile of it on a construction site, we do have a pickup service where our truck will go to site and collect it, and there is a small charge that covers just the pickup cost, not the paint itself. The other key thing is getting the paint back to stores. It means we can actually check what comes back. So we actually require that the paint comes into the store. The store staff actually have to open it and check what's inside the container. And in all honesty, that's actually more about deterrence than it is anything else. Because people who return the paint know that it's going to be checked, hopefully they check it first and they don't leave a lot of rubbish in the containers. In the early days when we weren't checking the stock, we found a lot of unwanted treats in the containers. People just either doing it on purpose or forgetting what they put inside them. The containers can have paint on them. We don't expect them to be clean. We don't ask people to wash them out in advance. And the aim is, of course, for people to use up as much paint as they can. So we do encourage people to actually try and use the paint before they return the container, but we do accept that paint will come back in the containers as well. We ask that the paint is in the original container, and this has been really key for us to make sure that you know what you're dealing with. If people, in the early days, people got clever and thought they'd mix, 3 brands of paint in the same container, that caused a lot of trouble because you don't know what you're actually recycling. So for us, we would rather get 10 containers that are all part full than one container that's completely full. And as I said, it just means that everyone down the line knows what they're actually dealing with in the paint. As I said, we asked for people to bring it inside. Paint left outside can be a hazard. Only once have we had an issue with paint being left outside being a hazard. And that was just hot sun and a paint can. We do have some issues at times with people dumping outside the stores after hours. And the way we've solved that in most areas is actually just putting a camera outside the store, and that's normally enough of a deterrent to stop people doing that. Generally speaking, though, the vast majority of people are really good. They bring it in, they follow the rules. On site, the key is to make recycling the easy option. So make it super simple. If recycling is easy, people will do it. If you make it hard, they won't. So first step is set the expectation. Make it clear that it's expected that paint and packaging will be recycled and that it will not go in the skip. If it goes in the skip, whoever put it in there fishes it out and actually put it where it's supposed to be. Having a designated collection point is key, somewhere that the paint can live while you're getting ready to kind of pile up enough it's worth going to the store with it. We always recommend that's under shelter and out of direct sunlight, purely because paint cans left out in the rain can rust, paint left out in the sun can heat up and potentially become a hazard. We always ask that the paint containers have lids on them because obviously wet paint can get away and people do knock things over. We don't need the paint sorted. It doesn't matter which one's which, as long as they're all together is fine. And we also recommend bunding it. So basically just making sure if there was a leak in a container, which realistically is probably unlikely, but just to be on the safe side, to make sure that the paint couldn't run anywhere. We do that by, if you see the picture on the left, you can see that we actually handle that by actually having collapsible containers. That one there is actually based on one of our stores. We actually sort it into community, solvent, and water-based. But as I said on site, we just expect one container for everything is fine. And the aim is to make it, as I said, super easy. Recycling should be the path of least resistance. It should be the easiest thing to do. And if it's the easiest thing to do, people will do it. If you make it hard, they won't do it. The other part to paint-wise, and what we've really learned through the whole process, is you can also design out a lot of waste before you start. So the more work you do up front, the easier the recycling process is. And what we found years ago, we used to have yellow pails, grey pails, and white pails, which we used to differentiate different products. We didn't really need them. It was just kind of a nice to have on a marketing side of things. The reality is that as soon as you put yellow and grey in with white pails, it means it's harder to recycle it because you end up with a discoloured plastic mix, basically. So we very quickly moved all our pails to white only, which means that when the pails come back, you end up with a white pail when you make it again. So therefore, you can kind of keep recycling your white pail and make more white pails. So it gives you a consistency of what your recycled material, what your recycled packaging is going to look like. We also have reduced our packaging range. So we used to have some packaging that was impossible to recycle. And over time, we've looked for other options that are better. One example of that would be we have a 250ml PET jar that we were using for test pots at the time. We got it in black because we thought it looked cool. The reality is that black PET is not as readily recycled as the clear PET. So we changed it to clear and just used the label to actually differentiate the product that way. Avoid mixing your packaging material types. So we have, for example, pails. So they are plastic and they have a metal handle. That's actually okay because the handle can be just chopped off easily and therefore separated. We have from some of our suppliers in the past been shown pack options where there is metal molded into plastic. As soon as you get that, you pretty much make it very impossible to recycle, or it's hard to recycle easily. We also focus on packaging that can be reused again and again. So if you take the example of our buckets, a lot of our buckets don't come back because they're such good buckets. People use them around the house, they use them on site, they donate them to community groups. We have a lot of demand for empty buckets. So, it's almost like the tip-top ice cream container. If you make a good container, it will have a longer life because people can reuse it. We also minimize all soft plastic and extra packaging. So our pails go out on pallets with the bare minimum of packaging. Our boxes, we reuse them multiple times, so they come back to head office and get reused again and again and again. So we're not having to create more and more cardboard packaging. And then also thinking beyond the product to other things that you do as well. A lot of waste is actually on other things, not necessarily on the product. And while it doesn't affect necessarily construction waste, it's all part of the big picture. The other thing we do, so that beyond the packaging, we also try and reduce paint waste before it gets to site. And most of that is around the specification and the choosing the product. So customers, perfectly capable of specifying product correctly. Sometimes they need a helping hand to choose the right product for the job to make sure that it doesn't get wasted. Ordering right is really, really key. And for us, that is about choosing the right color, making sure your order is clear so you don't get a mistinted color and therefore that paint would be wasted, and also ordering the right quantity. And that's a common one where people fall over, is they think, I'll buy a 10 litre because I think I need that. And in reality, they might just need 1 to 4 litres. And the other one for us is making sure the product arrives in good condition. And if you think about what that means for us, is if you put a paint container in a car, drive around a corner fast, that paint container can tip and the paint can fall out. So in reality, making sure for whatever your product is, that it arrives in the right condition. For your product, that might mean keeping it dry or keeping it dust-free. Once the paint gets to site, there's also ways to reduce paint waste beyond recycling it. Clearly, following the product instructions is a great way to reduce waste. Our biggest issue in the paint industry is people not putting on the right amount of paint. So you'll find some painters will stretch the paint too far, which means they might end up with 4 litres left over when in reality they should have used up the entire can. It's a very easy thing to check that you're doing it right. You check on the back of the container. You can see how far it should spread. If you're not spreading it, if you find you've got a lot of leftover paint, that means you didn't put enough on, which is not great for the project and not great for the waste. So we've got a lot of guidelines around that, and we do make videos on that as well. The other thing on site is minimizing the washing, as I mentioned earlier. So that's things like wrapping your brush in between when you're taking a break or overnight. We also have a wash-wise system that enables you to help clean out your application tools, which minimizes the paint wastes. And then also cleaning and reusing pails as water buckets or similar is a great way to also reduce the amount of buckets coming back. We encourage everyone to paint out of a separate paint pot because that keeps the original paint in the best condition possible. Storing and using the paint, storing the paint correctly. So as I said, out of the sun, out of the rain, so that it can be used later, and then saving the paint for reuse later. So typically for top coats, which are coloured, it's often pretty hard to reuse them later because the colours change job to job. But if you're using a primer, reusing it later is very, very easy because a quick dry primer on one project can easily be used on another project. And then to the challenges, and honestly, this is the biggest part of any product stewardship. There are a lot of challenges, and you've got to expect them. They're going to be bumps along the road.
Karen, I'm wondering if I could just interject there a wee bit. Yeah. So that's brilliant overview. I know there's a load of challenges. One that just we are running a bit short of time. We've got another speaker. Yeah. I'm not sure if you could, if there's an opportunity to summarize, because of course we're going to be sending these slides out at the end.
Yeah, the challenges is probably the key bit. probably the main challenge you're going to have is that nobody will want to pay for the service. So you've really got to figure out quite quickly what your financial model looks like, and whether that, in our case, that was a levy. We actually levy on purchases, so therefore we actually have a pool of funds available, and we basically decided that we would cover half the costs and the customer would cover half the costs, and that's the way it still works today. So that's a really key thing. That model may need to change over time. Recycling is not cheap, and people assume that it is really, really cheap to recycle or even free. Unfortunately, curbside recycling has made people think that. So if you want more details on any of the challenges, I'm more than happy to discuss them after the presentation or in future weeks. But there certainly are a lot of issues to deal with, but as I said, none of them are insurmountable. You just have to kind of deal with them one by one as you go through.
Wonderful.
And probably the only other thing is developing the end markets. That will be probably your biggest challenge, as to where does your product go at the end of life. And that's just a case of just working through one by one, the easiest things to the hardest things, until you figure out where they can go.
For sure, absolutely. Hey, Karen, thank you so much for sharing that. You're absolute pioneer in this space, charging through and sort of making all the mistakes so no one else has to make them. So really appreciate you sharing that and then contributing to the resource. So appreciate that. So our final speaker today is Joanne. So over to you, Joanne.
Hello, I'll just share my screen quickly. Is everyone okay to see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Joanne. I'm from the Environmental Innovation Center. And today we'll be talking about our experience on construction sites and how that relates to product stewardship. So just to give you a quick introduction, our center just turned 1 year old last week, but we started investigating construction waste before 2019. And our main areas of research is construction waste. So to look to characterize what kind of waste we're producing on site, as we think this is the most important step and what we've been trying to investigate. And second is to make sure that our research and information is easily understandable and accessible to construction sites. So on any site, we'll advise people to firstly prevent and reduce the amount of waste that they're producing, as well as reuse it and recycle it before eventually sending it to landfill. So we try to find connections between different sectors to see what kind of waste they're producing, and if anything can be sent to the same kind of recycler and in collaboration. So just to go through our process quickly, the first thing we do is audit all the waste that comes from a site. So you can see in this first picture, we've categorized all the waste, and then we would weigh it and take a sample for chemical analysis. Then we use this to find options to reduce, recycle, and reuse it. And then using this information will help a site to set up a waste separation station, as well as using our signs. And finally, to train the staff on site on how they can separate their waste. So briefly, the issue with construction waste is that about 25,000 tons are sent to landfill every year. And currently there's little incentive to avoid landfill because the levy is only $50 a ton for class 1, which is quite a lot less than in other countries. On-site separation of waste, in particular plastics, is quite rare. And there's a lack of standardization regarding what kind of waste we should separate and what can be recycled in different areas. So for plastic waste, there's no clear recycling endpoint. The recycler depends on what kind of, what area you're in, what's available, and whether or not you can actually get your waste to the recycler. So transportation is often not available. However, even though it is difficult, it is possible. So this picture of these 6 houses was a case study that we did where the owner was able to divert 91% of their waste from landfill. So it's something that's definitely possible and that we see on the rise. So one of the first things that we recommend to sites is to find out what kind of waste that they can return to their suppliers for recycling. For example, cable reels can often go back to electricians for respooling. Polystyrene can be taken back by X-Ball, and these can be scheduled for collection through their free app. Shrink Wrap Supplies is also doing some great work for product stewardship. through their new take back scheme that they recently launched. And Mali can also take back pipes for recycling, which is PVC and HDPE. So the main things that we want our sites to know is how to sort their waste, how to find a recycler or to talk to the supplier, and how to transport it. And from a supplier point of view, tracking is a good thing to keep in mind, because it can let you know, it can let the customer know how much waste they're recycling, and it can also let you know whether the waste that they're returning is of good quality and whether or not they need to be penalized or talked to. So in all, we want our sites to sort waste, keep it compact, and keep it clean. And again, Shrink Wrap Supplies has a new scheme that they launched. So they make it really easy for the customer because they provide the bags which they can use to collect waste. The bags also have a barcode so that they're tracked, and they can report this back to the customer, as well as keep track of which sites are doing well and which aren't doing so well. So the best product stewardship scheme, even if it's perfect from the manufacturer's side, will fail if the construction site isn't set up for it. So we need the right processes, education to ensure that there's high quality separation. So we want to make sure that the logistics are as easy as possible. So that's storing and transporting waste. We want the site staff to keep waste materials as clean as they can and of high quality, and also to have the right education and signage. So our work has been encouraging on-site separation. We go on site and aim for a dedicated space on site for bags, as well as clear signage. So these signs have been designed in mind to keep it really simple, so people can just look at the picture and identify their waste type and put it in the right bag. Also, engagement of staff and management is really important. So having ongoing training of staff, and also regular monitoring by the site manager. So just making sure that the waste sorted is correct and that it goes off to the recycler as soon as it's ready. And we try to make this as easy and accessible for people as possible. So putting it all into a diagram like this, so that people can easily identify what waste can go where. So in conclusion, we don't have all the answers yet. And one big hurdle is transportation, which can make or break opportunities to avoid landfill. So for example, we have a few construction sites in Dunedin who are trying to recycle their waste, but the recyclers are in Invercargill, and we found that transporting the waste from Dunedin to Invercargill is actually more costly than the recycling itself. So we want to work with the rail network to set up a system for transporting waste using trains, as this is a lot less carbon intensive, and trains are often empty when they travel from the south to the north of New Zealand. And product subsidies and waste penalties can also help. So having penalties for sites that sort waste incorrectly, that can also help to keep that more regulated and to ensure that the products are of high quality. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joanne. Really love that deep work you're doing from practical research into action. Love it. Hey, just a quick heads up, because we've had so much to put into this webinar, we are going to be running a couple of minutes over time. For those who have to go, then have to go, but you can also watch the rest of this recording when it's distributed later. But for those who've got a few minutes to see the rest of the presentation, that would be great. So what we have is effectively all that learning plus more in our Breaking the Waste Cycle Guide to Product Stewardship in Construction resource. That is now downloadable from our website, sustainable.org.nz. We will send you the specific link after this webinar. We have followed a process to help it, help you navigate more easily the whole various steps of product stewardship, from scoping and design right through to that reverse logistics issue that we've been hearing about, and in terms of also what the solutions are there for those materials. So this is quite a jam-packed resource with key steps and additional case studies. So really encourage you to download and really use that guide to help with your ongoing work. The other thing I mentioned is that we have been doing some work on integrated design, and effectively we'll be having another webinar this 1 o'clock tomorrow, same channel. And this is effectively using really the power of collaboration, getting the stakeholders within the value chain to actually collaborate at the get-go. If they can collaborate at the start rather than a architect just passing down a design to a builder contractor, then there is some massive benefits in terms of building out waste and effectively much more broader outcomes. It's faster, better, and cheaper. So if you haven't already registered for that, please do, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Another resource we've got is focusing on the power of communication and common language. Lots of jargon that we often hear when we're talking about the circular economy and construction. So we have developed a shared language that again is downloadable from the website from now. We'll send you again the link to that. And the other thing is that we have been consulting and working with stakeholders in the construction sector for a good few years. And there's some really clear actions that need to be taken. And we've been told by numerous people that they need to be taken. We've curated that, and with the help of the Construction Sector Accord, put them into this industry-led implementation plan for the sector to achieve greater circularity. And its focus is on intervention points around design, demand, business models, the operations, infrastructure, technology, and legislation. And of course, a plan in itself is useless without the action. So this is developed by the industry, so implore the industry to use that in terms of shaping the actions that you'll take. So where to from here? Well, please download the resources. And importantly, we really want to hear how you've got on. Email us on progress. We want to share the stories to be able to inspire others. And if you think of the example of Karen at Resene, she's done all the hard work and is now sharing that for everyone. So if you can share your knowledge to help others, that would be brilliant. On a practical note, there's multiple solutions for your business to increase their circular performance at our circular economy directory. So if you haven't already, please do check out that. And a very simple request, there's so much stuff happening within the network. To keep your hand on the pulse, please sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. Thank you, and I will close with Karakia. Unahia, unahia, unahia ki te uru kapanui, ki wātia, ki mama te nakau. Te tinana, te warua, ki te ara tangata. Koirare rongo, whakarihia ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina, huye, tai kia. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jane.